The Kether Dominion did not lose fleets. In 300 years of conquest, that had never happened, not once. Not against empires with thousands of warships, not against civilizations older than their own, not even against enemies who controlled entire star systems. But the Seventh Conquest Fleet vanished. 300 warships, gone. No distress signals. No debris fields. No radiation signatures. No survivors. One moment, they were in orbit over a primitive world called Earth. The next, there was nothing. No battle. No explosion. No trace they had ever existed. At first, High Command assumed a navigational anomaly. A miscalculated jump, perhaps a rare stellar event. But the data didn't agree. Long-range sensors confirmed the fleet had arrived safely. They had entered orbit. They had deployed into full conquest formation. And then, silence. The system remained intact. The planet was untouched. Even the humans continued their daily lives. As if nothing had happened. That was the first detail that disturbed them. Because every species reacted. Every world, when faced with extinction, showed fear. Panic. Resistance. Earth showed none. No emergency broadcasts. No defensive mobilization. No attempt to flee. Just silence. And something else. Something buried deep within the sensor logs. Something no one noticed until it was too late. The moon. During the fleet's final recorded moments, long-range instruments detected fluctuations, brief, almost invisible distortions in space surrounding Earth's moon. At the time, they were dismissed as interference. Now, they were the only clue left behind. 300 warships do not simply disappear. Not without a cause. Not without a weapon. And certainly not without a message. 6 months later, the Dominion would send another fleet to investigate. What they would find would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Because Earth was never defenseless. Earth was waiting. Supreme Commander Vorak did not believe in coincidences. Empires did not rise on chance. Fleets did not vanish without cause, and the Kether Dominion did not make mistakes. For 3 centuries, their expansion had been absolute. 164 star systems brought under Dominion control. Thousands of worlds stripped of resistance. Entire civilizations reduced to labor, resources, or erased completely. There were no stalemates. No drawn-out wars. No defeats. Only conquest. The Dominion's strength was not just in numbers, though they had those in abundance. It was in doctrine, precision, relentless efficiency refined over generations of war. Every fleet operated like a perfect machine. Commanders were bred, not chosen, trained from childhood in strategy, psychology, and total war. Every engagement followed calculated patterns. Every enemy response had already been studied, predicted, countered. The result was simple. Victory was not hoped for. It was expected. And the Seventh Conquest Fleet had been one of their finest. 300 warships, each one capable of planetary annihilation. Quantum-shielded hulls that could withstand stellar radiation. Plasma arrays that could melt continents in minutes. Strike fighters faster than most species could even track. At its center stood the flagship, Oblivion Spear, a vessel so heavily armed it had ended 3 wars without support. And leading it all, Admiral Zethel, a name that carried weight across conquered systems. He had overseen 3 successful planetary subjugations. He had never lost a ship under his command, and more importantly, he understood fear. Not his own. The enemy's. Zethel did not simply defeat civilizations. He broke them. He knew exactly when to demonstrate power, and when to let silence do the work. Entire worlds had surrendered without a single shot fired, simply from the sight of his fleet entering orbit. That was Dominion strategy. Overwhelm the senses, destroy hope, force submission before resistance could even form. It was efficient. It was flawless. And it had never failed. Which was why the reports from Earth made no sense. Vorak stood before the Central War display, watching the reconstructed telemetry from the 7th Fleet's final moments. The formation was perfect. Textbook precision. Ships aligned in full intimidation pattern over the planet's atmosphere, exactly as they had done over 164 worlds before. Weapons charged, communications broadcast, surrender demand issued. Everything correct. And yet, no response. Vorak narrowed his eyes. That was the first deviation. Primitive species always responded. Sometimes with panic, sometimes with desperate negotiation, sometimes with foolish resistance. But always something. Earth had offered nothing. No signals. No coordination. No fear. Just silence. A low murmur spread through the war chamber as the final sensor logs replayed again. Energy readings fluctuating. Gravitational distortions near the moon. Sensor inconsistencies dismissed in real time by fleet officers. Vorak slowed the recording. Zoomed in. For a fraction of a second, space itself appeared to shift. Then stabilize. Nothing. The entire fleet vanished between one scan and the next. No explosion. No radiation spike. No debris. 300 warships erased, without a trace. A younger officer stepped forward, unable to hide the tension in his voice. Supreme Commander, no known weapon system can produce this effect. Vorak did not respond immediately, because that statement was incorrect. There was always a weapon. If something could be destroyed, something else had the power to destroy it. That was the first law of the Dominion. And now, something had demonstrated that power over them. Prepare a reconnaissance fleet, Vorak said finally, his voice calm but cold. Long-range analysis first. No engagement. The officers hesitated. Caution was not Dominion protocol. It never had been. Vorak noticed. Until we understand what happened, he continued, we will assume one possibility. He turned back to the display, eyes fixed on the silent blue world rotating slowly in the projection. That Earth is not what it appears to be. The room fell completely silent. Because if that were true, then the Dominion had not just lost a fleet. They had underestimated an enemy. And in 300 years of conquest, that had never happened before. The first detailed reports on Earth had been almost disappointing. Compared to the empires the Kether Dominion had crushed, humanity barely registered as a threat. No interstellar fleet. No planetary shields. No unified command structure. Just one small world, divided against itself. The planet's surface was fragmented into hundreds of independent nations, each operating under its own leadership, its own priorities, its own conflicts. Their communications were chaotic, millions of signals overlapping constantly, most of them irrelevant. Entertainment, commerce, internal disputes, noise. From a Dominion perspective, it was a sign of weakness. Strong civilizations spoke with one voice. Earth spoke with thousands. Their military capabilities were equally unimpressive. Chemical propulsion systems still formed the backbone of their space travel. Primitive rockets, inefficient and slow, barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their orbital presence consisted of scattered satellites and a handful of small stations, none armed, none shielded, none designed for war. Their weapons? Crude. Metal projectiles accelerated by chemical reactions. Explosive devices that relied on splitting atoms, a technology the Dominion had surpassed centuries ago. Even their most destructive systems required massive infrastructure and could not be deployed effectively beyond their atmosphere. On paper, humanity was not just behind. They were obsolete. And yet, they were violent. That was the one detail Dominion analysts found noteworthy. Human history was saturated with conflict. Wars spanning centuries. Global-scale destruction. Weapons used not just against enemies, but against their own kind. Billions had died in their internal struggles. Not for conquest, not for expansion, but for ideology, territory, resources. Sometimes for reasons the Dominion could not even categorize. To the Kether, this was not strength. It was chaos, undisciplined aggression without purpose. A species that could not unite itself could never stand against an external threat. That was the conclusion. That was the assumption. And it was reinforced by everything the Dominion observed. Even as their fleet approached Earth in the final days before disappearance, human behavior remained unchanged. Cities functioned normally, trade continued, civilian traffic moved through orbit without urgency. No global emergency protocols. No visible preparation for invasion. It was as if they did not understand what was coming. Or worse, they did not believe it mattered. Dominion doctrine had encountered this type of behavior before. Some primitive species entered denial when faced with overwhelming force. They clung to routine, refusing to acknowledge the inevitable until it was too late. Those conquests were always the easiest. No resistance. No coordination. Just submission. Earth fit the pattern perfectly. Even their communication systems reinforced the illusion. Intercepted transmissions revealed no unified strategy. No military escalation. No attempt to consolidate planetary defense. Instead, the signal traffic remained fragmented and inefficient, millions of independent broadcasts with no central control. To Dominion analysts, it confirmed everything. Humanity was not hiding strength. They simply didn't have any. The few anomalies that appeared in the data were dismissed quickly. Minor fluctuations in signal patterns, brief periods of reduced communication activity, unexplained gaps that could not be immediately categorized. Statistical noise. Nothing more. Because when a species is primitive, irregularities are expected. Their systems are unstable. Their technologies inconsistent. Their data unreliable. That was the reasoning. That was the mistake. Even the lunar observations, those faint, inconsistent energy readings detected near Earth's moon, were ultimately categorized as environmental interference. Solar radiation, background cosmic distortion, sensor error. The idea that a civilization like humanity could produce controlled energy signatures of that nature was considered impossible. So the data was archived, ignored, forgotten, and the illusion held. From every measurable perspective, Earth remained exactly what it appeared to be. A young species. A divided world. A primitive civilization standing at the very edge of space. Vulnerable. Exposed. Unprepared. The kind of target the Dominion had conquered 164 times before. There was no reason to think this time would be different. No reason to question the outcome. No reason to hesitate. Because if there had been, if even one analyst had looked deeper, if even one commander had questioned the silence, if even one signal had been interpreted correctly, then perhaps the 7th Conquest Fleet would never have entered orbit, and 300 warships would still exist. But they didn't, because the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed was not visible, it was not detectable, and it did not behave like anything the Dominion had ever encountered before. Humanity's greatest advantage was that everyone believed they were weak. The anomaly was first logged as a minor inconsistency. A routine sensor fluctuation, barely measurable, easily ignored. It appeared in the outer layers of Earth's system, subtle distortions in electromagnetic readings that did not align with known stellar activity. The deviation lasted less than a second before stabilizing. Standard protocol flagged it. Standard protocol dismissed it. Because anomalies were common in primitive systems. Unrefined technology, unstable energy outputs, natural interference from planetary magnetospheres. There was always noise. And this looked like noise. But it wasn't alone. Hours later, another fluctuation appeared, this time closer to the planet's moon. Then another. Then several more. Each one brief, each one faint, each one inconsistent. They did not follow a pattern. They did not repeat in predictable intervals. And most importantly, they did not behave like natural phenomena. The first officer to question it was not a commander, not a strategist, but a sensor analyst assigned to long-range observation. Junior Technician Reln had no authority to challenge fleet assumptions, no reputation to protect, no victories to defend, which made her dangerous, because she was willing to notice what others ignored. "Run that sequence again," she said quietly, eyes fixed on her display. The data replayed. At first glance, it looked the same: background radiation, minor signal drift, standard cosmic interference. But when she isolated the fluctuations, they moved. Not randomly, not chaotically, but with intent. Reln leaned forward. "That's not interference. Her supervisor barely looked up. Log it and move on. We're not here to study a primitive system. But the pattern. There is no pattern. He didn't even check. Didn't verify. Didn't care. Because there was nothing to care about. Earth was not a threat. And threats were the only things worth analyzing. Reln hesitated, then complied. The anomaly was logged. Categorized. Ignored. But the distortions continued. As the fleet moved closer to Earth, the fluctuations grew slightly stronger. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to remain present. Persistent. Watching. Waiting. Other systems began reporting minor inconsistencies as well. Navigation sensors occasionally required recalibration. Long-range scans returned brief gaps, fractions of a second where data simply wasn't there. Even internal systems registered micro-delays, too small to affect operations, but too precise to be random. Individually, none of it mattered. Together, it should have. But the Dominion did not operate on uncertainty. It operated on certainty. And certainty said this. Earth was primitive. Earth was defenseless. Earth could not produce anything capable of interfering with Dominion systems. So the anomalies were explained away. Faulty readings, environmental distortion, minor calibration drift. Every report had an answer. Even if the answer was wrong. The only officer who continued to push the issue was Scout Captain Vexen. Unlike Reln, Vexen had authority. And unlike her superiors, she paid attention. Admiral, she said during a routine briefing, her tone controlled but firm, the sensor inconsistencies are increasing in frequency. Zethel did not turn from the viewing window. Define increasing. Still within acceptable margins, Vexen admitted. But the pattern suggests escalation as we approach the lunar orbit. Pattern? Commander Kexton scoffed. You're seeing structure where none exists. Vexen ignored him. The fluctuations are centered around the moon. Not the planet. Not the surrounding space. Specifically, the moon. That got a reaction. Not concern. Amusement. Their moon? Kexton laughed. A lifeless rock with no atmosphere, no infrastructure, and no strategic value? Correct, Vexen said. Which is why the data doesn't make sense. Zethel finally turned. Captain, are you suggesting that this primitive species has established a hidden installation on their satellite? No, sir. Then what are you suggesting? Vexen paused. Because the honest answer sounded impossible. I don't know. Silence followed. Not the tense kind. The dismissive kind. Zethel folded his arms behind his back. In 3 centuries of conquest, Captain, have we ever encountered a primitive species capable of concealing advanced technology from Dominion sensors? No, sir. Have we ever encountered a civilization that could interfere with our systems without detection? No, sir. Then we will not begin assuming such things now. The conversation ended there. Because in the Dominion, precedent was truth. If something had never happened before, it could not happen now. Vexen lowered her head. Yes, Admiral. But she didn't stop watching. Because the data kept changing. The fluctuations became sharper. More defined. Less like interference. And more like something adjusting. Reacting. Responding. On the final approach to Earth's orbit, the anomalies reached their peak. For just under 2 seconds, every long-range sensor aboard the fleet returned 0 data. Not interference. Not distortion. Nothing. Complete absence. Then just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. Ships remained in formation. Systems reported nominal.no damage.no alerts. As if nothing had happened. Sensor blackout? Zethel demanded. Negative, Admiral, the officer replied. All systems are operational. No malfunction detected. Then explain it. We can't. The pause. Then Kexton waved it off. Transient glitch. Likely caused by the planet's magnetosphere. There was no evidence for that. But it sounded reasonable. And that was enough. Zethel accepted the explanation. Because it aligned with what he already believed. Continue approach, he ordered. And just like that, The most important warning they would ever receive was ignored. Far below them, Earth rotated in silent indifference. And beyond their perception, something was watching. Not with eyes, not with sensors, but with awareness that did not operate within the limits of their understanding. The fleet crossed into orbital position. Weapons systems came online. Formation stabilized. The conquest began. And the anomalies stopped. Completely. No more fluctuations. No more distortions. No more inconsistencies. Perfect stability. Perfect silence. Which should have been reassuring. Instead, it was the most dangerous sign of all. Because whatever had been observing them had finished preparing. The Dominion did not hesitate. Hesitation implied doubt. Doubt implied weakness. And weakness did not exist within the Kether doctrine. So when the 7th Conquest Fleet settled into full orbital formation above Earth, everything proceeded exactly as it always had. Perfectly. 300 warships aligned across the planet's atmosphere, their silhouettes blotting out sections of the sky below. From the surface, they would appear as a wall of metal and fire, an unbroken display of dominance. It was intentional. Fear was the first weapon, and the Dominion wielded it flawlessly. Formation locked, reported the navigation officer. All vessels in position. Weapons? Zethel asked. Fully charged, Admiral. Targeting solutions available for all major population centers. Good. Zethel stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with authority. This was the moment every conquest hinged on. Not the battle. The message. Open all communication channels, he ordered. Broadcast on every frequency they possess. The transmission array activated instantly. A signal powerful enough to blanket the entire planet. Precise. Impossible to ignore. Zethel spoke without raising his voice. People of Earth, he began, his tone calm, controlled, absolute. You are now under the authority of the Kether Dominion. Across the fleet, officers stood in silence as the message echoed through space. Your civilization is primitive. Your defenses are non-existent. Resistance is irrational. Below them, the blue world continued to turn. Unchanged. You will surrender immediately. Your leaders will be permitted to govern under Dominion supervision. Your population will be integrated into our labor systems. The pause. Failure to comply will result in demonstration. The transmission ended. Silence followed. Zethel waited. This was routine. Every species needed time to process. To panic. To decide. Minutes passed. Then hours. No response. Communication status? Zethel asked. Lieutenant Dexter checked his console. All channels clear, Admiral. Transmission received globally. No reply detected. Zethel frowned slightly. Not concern. Just deviation. Expand monitoring, he said. Track all human signals. Yes, Admiral. Data streams flooded the displays. Millions of transmissions. Civilian broadcasts, commercial signals, routine traffic. Everything normal. No emergency declarations. No unified command response. No indication that anything had changed. Commander Kexton let out a short laugh. They don't understand, he said. Primitive cognition. They cannot process the scale of what they're facing. Or they are already surrendering internally, another officer added. Their leadership structures may be collapsing. Zethel considered that possible. It had happened before. Entire governments paralyzed by fear before they could respond. Something felt off. Scan for military mobilization, he ordered. Already complete, Admiral, Dexter replied. No large-scale movement detected. No weapon systems powering up. No defensive formations. Orbital activity? Minimal. Civilian craft adjusting positions, but no coordinated pattern. Kexton smirked. Cowards, he said. They're trying to move out of the way. Zethel did not respond, because Vexen was already stepping forward again. Admiral, she said, voice controlled but urgent. This behavior does not match previous conquest patterns. Kexton rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Vexen ignored him. Primitive civilizations typically increase communication during threat events. They attempt coordination, even if ineffective. Earth's communication has decreased. That drew attention. Zethel turned slightly. Clarify. Global transmission volume is down approximately 87% since our arrival. The pause. That is unusual. Or efficient, Kexton cut in. Perhaps they've already accepted their fate. No, Vexen said. This is not surrender behavior. Then what is it? She hesitated, because the answer didn't fit Dominion logic. It's controlled. Silence. Kexton laughed again. Controlled? But they don't even have a unified government. That's what the data says, Vexen replied. And the data is wrong. Simple. Dismissed. Zethel stepped in. Captain Vexen, he said, his tone colder now, you have raised concerns multiple times. Each has been investigated. Each has been resolved. With respect, Admiral, they have been explained, not resolved. That shifted the atmosphere. Because now, she was challenging authority. A dangerous line. Zethel's gaze hardened. In 3 centuries of Dominion expansion, he said slowly, has any primitive species ever successfully deceived us? No, sir. Has any inferior civilization ever concealed advanced capabilities from our sensors? No, sir. Then we will not assume that Earth is the first. Vexen lowered her head. Yes, Admiral. But she didn't step back. Then allow me to propose a simple test. Zethel paused. Proceed. Deploy a single strike vessel. Limited engagement. Probe their defenses before full demonstration. The bridge went completely still. That was not protocol. Kexton reacted immediately. Absolutely not, he snapped. We do not test primitive species. We dominate them. This is not standard behavior, Vexen insisted. The anomalies, the silence. Enough. Zethel's voice cut through the room like a blade. This discussion is over. Vexen froze. Zethel stepped closer. You are allowing uncertainty to cloud your judgment. That is not the behavior of a Dominion officer. I am recommending caution. And I am rejecting it. Silence. Heavy. Final. Zethel turned back toward the planet. We will proceed as planned. He didn't need to raise his voice. The decision was absolute. Prepare demonstration strike. Kexton smiled. Finally. Dexter nodded. Target acquired. Largest population center locked. Below them, a city glowed against the darkness. Millions of lives. Unaware. Irrelevant. Zethel watched it for a moment. Then gave the order. Charge primary weapons. Across the fleet, energy surged. Plasma arrays ignited. Targeting systems synchronized. Power levels climbed toward destructive thresholds. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Exactly as it had been 164 times before. Behind him, Vexen stood frozen. Not in fear, but in realization. Because every instinct she had, every piece of data, every inconsistency, was screaming the same thing. This was wrong. Not different. Not unusual. Wrong. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the Dominion did not stop. It did not question. It did not adapt. Until it was forced to. And by the time that happened, it was already too late. Primary batteries at full charge, Dexter reported. Awaiting firing authorization. Zethel raised his hand. For just a fraction of a second. Not doubt. Just calculation. Fire. Admiral. The interruption shattered the moment. All eyes snapped to the sensor station. Lieutenant Sexel's voice was no longer controlled. It was panicked. Energy spike detected from the lunar surface. The room froze. Define spike, Zethel demanded. Sexel's hands trembled over the console. It's off scale. That had never been said before. Ever. Zethel turned slowly toward the main display. Earth's moon hung there. Silent. Unchanged. But the readings were impossible. Power levels rising exponentially. Quantum distortions spreading outward. space itself beginning to bend. Kexton stepped forward, disbelief creeping into his voice. What kind of weapon generates that level of energy from a dead rock? No one answered. Because no one knew. Vexen didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had already seen this coming. Too late. Far too late. Zethel stared at the display. For the first time in his career, he did not have an explanation. The Dominion had faced unknowns before. But never like this. Never something that violated everything they understood about power, physics, reality. Hold fire, he said quietly. Not an order. A reaction. Because suddenly, for the first time, victory was no longer certain. And that changed everything. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, humanity was already watching. Not reacting. Not scrambling. Watching. The Solar Defense Command Center did not appear on any map, that IT did not exist in any public database, and no signal of any kind ever left its walls unless permitted. It had been built in silence. 30 years earlier, the day humanity first decoded the alien transmissions. At first, the signals had been a miracle, proof that they were not alone. But that feeling lasted exactly 11 minutes. That was how long it took to translate the first full transmission. A conquest report. One species, describing the systematic subjugation of another. Numbers. Resources. Casualties. No emotion. No hesitation. Just efficiency. That was when humanity understood something critical. They were not being contacted. They were being catalogued. And eventually, they would be next. So humanity made a decision. Not to prepare for war, but to prepare for something far worse. Inevitability. Status update. The voice was calm, controlled, precise. Admiral Sarah Chin stood at the center of the command floor, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. Around her, the room moved with quiet efficiency. No panic. No urgency. Just execution. The Kether fleet is now in full orbital position, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres. All ships accounted for. Formation matches predicted conquest pattern exactly. Of course it does, Sarah replied. She didn't look at the display. She didn't need to. They had seen this before. Not in reality, but in simulation. Thousands of times. Any deviation? She asked. None, Torres said. They're following standard intimidation protocol. Surrender broadcast has been transmitted. And global response? Minimal. Civilian communication maintained at baseline suppression levels. No deviation from deception profile. Sarah nodded once. Good. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Across the room, Dr. Marcus Webb monitored a different set of readings entirely. Not electromagnetic. Not thermal. Dimensional. Phase stability? Sarah asked without turning. Stable across all 12 platforms, Webb replied. We're holding at 99.8% coherence. Margin. Within tolerance. That was all she needed. Sarah finally looked up at the main display. 300 alien warships. Massive. Imposing. Overwhelming. To anyone else, it would have looked like the end of the world. To her, it looked like confirmation. They committed fully, she said. Torres allowed himself a small exhale. Yes, Admiral. That mattered. Because partial commitment meant retreat was possible. Full commitment meant they were trapped. Phantom Squadron status? Sarah asked. A new voice responded. Standing by, said Captain Jake Morrison. All pilots ready. Phase generators synchronized. Weapons locked. Morrison stood inside the command chamber of Phoenix 1, his hands resting lightly on the controls. Unlike the alien fleet above, his ship made no sound. It didn't need to. It wasn't entirely there. Outside the viewport, space didn't behave correctly. Light bent. Stars distorted. Reality itself seemed misaligned. Because Phoenix Squadron was not operating within normal space. Not fully. Energy levels? Sarah asked. Full capacity, Webb replied. 0-point system stable. Dimensional reserves at maximum. 12 ships. Against 300. The numbers were irrelevant. They always had been. Final confirmation, Sarah said. The room grew still. Not tense. Focused. Do we have complete tactical superiority? Torres didn't hesitate. Yes, Admiral. Do they have any capability that can threaten our platforms? No, Admiral. Do they understand what they are facing? The pause. No, Admiral. Sarah allowed herself the smallest smile. Then we proceed. She stepped forward. For 30 years, she said, her voice carrying across the command center, we have watched them. Displays shifted. Alien fleets, destroyed worlds, conquest records. They believe war is about power. Another display. Energy outputs, weapon yields, fleet formations. They believe victory comes from overwhelming force. The image changed again. Blue. Quiet. They are wrong. Silence filled the room. Not dramatic. Certain. Victory, Sarah said, comes from understanding. She turned toward Webb. Explain it. Webb nodded, activating a layered projection. Space unfolded into something deeper, more complex. Everything they understand about physics, he began, is correct. The pause. It's just incomplete. The projection shifted. Multiple overlapping spatial layers appeared. Reality is not limited to 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. It operates across at least 11. Torres crossed his arms. And they can't perceive them. Exactly, Webb said. Which means they can't defend against something that operates within them. Morrison's voice came through the channel. Or even detect it. Webb continued. We don't overpower their shields. We bypass them. We don't destroy their ships. Morrison finished the sentence. We remove them. Silence. Not confusion. Clarity. Because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. Sarah looked back at the fleet. 300 warships. Every one of them built for combat. Every one of them irrelevant. They think we're primitive, she said quietly. No, Torres corrected. They need us to be. That was the key. The illusion had never been accidental. Humanity had engineered it. Every broadcast, every rocket launch, every piece of visible technology. Carefully curated. Deliberately limited. A performance. Because if the Dominion had known the truth, they would never have come close enough to engage. And distance was the only thing that could save them. Sarah folded her hands behind her back. Have they initiated attack sequence? Torres checked. Primary weapons charging. Targeting major population centers. Time to impact? Less than 2 minutes once they fire. Sarah nodded. Then we wait. Morrison's voice tightened slightly. Admiral, we are within optimal strike parameters now. I know. Then why delay? Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the fleet. Because right now, they still think they're in control. The pause. That matters. Understanding spread across the room. This wasn't just a battle. It was a message. They need to cross the line first, Sarah said. They need to commit to destruction. So there's no ambiguity, Webb added. No doubt, Torres said. No second chances, Morrison finished. Sarah nodded. Exactly. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was anticipation. Above them, the alien fleet prepared to fire. Weapons charged, targets locked, confidence absolute. Below them, humanity prepared to erase them. Not through strength, not through numbers, but through something far more dangerous. Understanding. Final systems check, Sarah said. Phase generators? Stable. Weapons? Ready. Cloaking? Active. She took one slow breath, then gave the order. Prepare for phase transition. Across the hidden hangars of Luna, 12 ships responded. Not with noise, not with motion, but with a shift. Reality bent. Dimensions aligned. And for the first time, humanity prepared to step into the open. Phantom Squadron, Sarah said. Stand by. Above them, 300 warships waited, certain of victory. completely unaware that they had already lost. War, to the Kether Dominion, was a demonstration of power. To humanity, it was a system that could be studied, modeled, predicted, and ultimately controlled. Overlay their doctrine. At Sarachen's command, the main display shifted. The alien fleet remained at the center, 300 warships in perfect formation, but now, layered over them, were lines, vectors, probabilities, every possible movement, every likely response. Predicted, expected. They haven't changed anything, Torres said quietly. They won't, Sarah replied. Because they didn't need to. For 300 years, the Dominion strategy had worked flawlessly. It had never been challenged in a way that forced adaptation. So it had never evolved. And that was their weakness. Show engagement sequence. The display updated. Phase 1, intimidation. Phase 2, surrender window. Phase 3, demonstration strike. Phase 4, full planetary subjugation. Every step already in motion. Every decision already made. Not by the present commanders, but by centuries of repetition. They're not thinking, Morrison said from Phoenix 1. They don't have to, Webb replied. Their doctrine does it for them. That was the difference. The Dominion fought using certainty. Humanity fought using uncertainty. And uncertainty could not be predicted. Simulate deviation, Sarah ordered. Torres input the command. The projection shifted. Small changes introduced into the scenario. Unexpected variables. Unknown behaviors. The system's prediction confidence dropped instantly. See that? Webb said. Their entire strategy collapses the moment the pattern breaks. Because they've never needed a backup plan, Torres added. Sarah nodded. They won't adapt in time. That was the key. Not just superiority. Timing. The Dominion was powerful, but it was slow to change. And against an opponent that operated outside its understanding. That delay was fatal. Confirm strike envelope, Sarah said. Torres checked the data. All enemy vessels are within optimal engagement range. No escape vectors available that exceed our phase tracking. They're boxed in, Morrison said. Completely, Torres confirmed. Not by force, but by positioning, by choice, by their own doctrine. They did this to themselves, Webb said quietly. Yes, Sarah replied. We just let them. The room remained calm, controlled, because from their perspective, the battle was already over. They were simply waiting for the moment to prove it. Psychological profile update, Sarah said. A new display appeared. Alien command hierarchy, behavioral patterns, decision thresholds. We've been listening to them for 5 years, Torres said. Every transmission. Every engagement log. Patterns? Sarah asked. Consistent, he replied. They rely on intimidation first. If that fails, they escalate quickly, but always within known parameters. No improvisation? Minimal. They interpret deviation as error, not threat. Webb leaned forward. Which means when we engage, they won't understand what's happening, Morrison finished. And by the time they do, Torres added. It won't matter, Sarah said. Silence. Not uncertainty. Finality. Because this was not a contest of strength. It was a contest of perception. And the Dominion was blind. Energy spike increasing, Torres reported. All eyes shifted. The lunar readings were climbing again. Not erratic. Not unstable. Controlled. Deliberate. They're noticing it, Webb said. Too late, Sarah replied. Above them, the alien fleet adjusted formation slightly, subtle shifts in positioning, minor recalibrations of targeting systems. Reaction. But not understanding. They're trying to interpret it as a conventional threat, Torres said. Of course they are, Sarah replied. That's the only framework they have. Which means they'll respond incorrectly. Exactly. Morrison's voice came through, steady. Admiral, all ships report phase alignment complete. We can engage at any moment. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She watched the fleet. 300 ships. Every one of them a product of centuries of dominance. Every one of them built on the assumption that nothing could challenge them. They think this is a battlefield, she said. Torres looked at her. It's not. No, Sarah said quietly. It's a demonstration. That distinction mattered, because a battle implied risk. A demonstration implied control. We're not here to win, she continued. We're here to make a point. Webb nodded slowly. To them. Sarah's eyes didn't leave the display. To everyone. Because the Dominion wasn't the only one watching. Other civilizations existed. Other empires. And they would all hear about this. The disappearance of a fleet. The silence that followed. And eventually, the message. Calm status. Sarah asked. Global blackout holding, Torres replied. All external signals filtered. No leak. Good. The illusion remained intact. To the outside world, Earth was still primitive. Still vulnerable. Still unaware. That illusion would remain. For now. Enemy weapons at full charge, Torres said. They're about to fire. Sarah nodded. Then we're done waiting. Morrison straightened in his chair. About time. Sarah allowed herself a small breath. Not tension. Not hesitation. Just transition. From preparation to execution. Final confirmation, she said. Is there any scenario where they survive this engagement? Torres didn't even look at the data. No. Webb didn't hesitate. None. Morrison's answer came instantly. Not a chance. Sarah nodded. Good. She stepped forward. Then let's begin. Across the hidden hangars of Luna, 12 ships shifted. Not launching. Not accelerating. But aligning. Reality bending around them like fabric under tension. Phantom Squadron, Sarah said, her voice steady, absolute. Engage on my mark. Above them, 300 warships prepared to fire on a defenseless world. Below them, 12 ships prepared to erase them from existence. Not through power. Not through numbers. But through something the Dominion had never encountered before. Total understanding. Mark. And with that, the balance of power in the galaxy. Admiral Zethel never finished the order. Fire. The word dissolved as every display on the bridge flickered at once. Not failed. Flickered. As if something had passed through the systems without touching them. Hit. Status. Zethel snapped. All systems operational. Dexter replied, voice tight. No damage detected. He stopped. Because the tactical display had changed. Not gradually. Instantly. 12 contacts. They hadn't approached. They hadn't accelerated. They hadn't emerged from any vector the sensors could track. They were simply between one scan and the next. Origin. Zethel demanded. Unknown, Sexel said, hands flying over the console. No launch signatures. No approach trajectory. No. He swallowed. No entry event. Kexton stared at the display. Impossible. The ships did not resemble anything in Dominion records. They were smaller than Kether warships, sleek, angular, surfaces shifting with a faint distortion that made them difficult to focus on directly. Light bent around them. Not reflected. Scan them, Zethel ordered. We are, Sexel replied. But the readings. He hesitated. They don't resolve. Clarify. Mass fluctuating. Energy signatures inconsistent. They phase in and out of sensor range. As if to demonstrate, one of the contacts flickered. Not vanished. Not moved. Just partially absent. Then solid again. Kexton took a step forward. Cloaking technology. No, Sexel said quietly. Not cloaking. Then what? I don't know. That word again. On a Dominion bridge. Zethel felt something unfamiliar press at the edges of his focus. Not fear. Not yet. But disruption. Communications, he said. Open a channel. No response. The 12 ships continued forward. Not in formation. Not in any pattern that matched known tactics. They moved independently. Fluidly. As if each one operated according to a different set of rules. Warning broadcast, Zethel ordered. Identify yourselves or be destroyed. The transmission went out. Silence returned. No reply. No acknowledgement. Just approach. They're ignoring us, Kexton said. Zethel didn't answer. Because one of the ships had just changed. It didn't accelerate. It didn't maneuver. Simply appeared. Inside the formation. Not between ships. Not around them. Inside. Sexel's voice broke. Contact has entered our perimeter without crossing it. What does that even mean? Kexton snapped. It means, Sexel's hands trembled, it didn't travel through space to get there. Zethel stared at the display. The human vessel, if that's what it was, hovered in the middle of his fleet. No shields activated. No weapons fired. No defensive posture. It wasn't acting like an attacker. It was acting like something that did not recognize the concept of threat. Target it, Zethel ordered. Weapons systems locked instantly. Dozens of plasma cannons aligned. Fire. The volley erupted. Energy surged across space. And passed straight through the ship. No impact. No detonation. No resistance. Just nothing. The beams continued beyond it, dissipating harmlessly into the void. Silence filled the bridge. That's not possible, Kexton said, his voice no longer steady. Recalibrate targeting. Zethel snapped. Already done. Dexter replied. Direct hits confirmed. Then why? Because it's not there. The words came from Sexel. So, terrified. It's only partially in our space. Zethel turned slowly. Explain. I can't, Sexel said. But the readings, when it flickers, it's not cloaking. It's leaving. Leaving where? The pause. Somewhere we can't detect. Another ship moved. Not around. Through. It passed directly across the hull of a Dominion cruiser. For a fraction of a second, both occupied the same coordinates. No collision. No explosion. Then the human vessel solidified. Inside the cruiser, every console on the bridge lit up red. Structural integrity failure. A voice shouted over comms. We have. The transmission cut off. On the display, the cruiser didn't explode. It didn't break apart. It simply stopped existing. Not the entire ship. Just sections. The bridge vanished. Cleanly. As if erased. The rest of the vessel drifted, lifeless. Kexton stepped back. What did they do? No one answered. Because it was happening again. Another human ship phased into a destroyer. Another vessel lost its engine core, gone in an instant. No debris. No fragments. No energy discharge. Just absence. Return fire. Zethel ordered. The fleet responded. Hundreds of weapons discharged simultaneously. Plasma, torpedoes, kinetic strikes. All of it useless. The human ships flickered, shifted, vanished and reappeared between attacks. Every shot passed through empty space, or through something that wasn't fully there. They're not dodging, Sexel said, his voice hollow. They're not targetable. Zethel felt it then. Not confusion. Not uncertainty. Something deeper. Loss of control. For the first time in his career, the battlefield did not belong to him. Formation break. Kexton shouted. Spread out. Increase distance. Ships began to move. Too late. Another cruiser lost its core. A carrier vanished section by section. Entire systems erased without a trace. Admiral, Dexter's voice cracked. We're losing ships. Zethel didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the display no longer made sense. His fleet, his perfect, unstoppable fleet, was dissolving. Not under attack. Not under pressure. But under something that did not follow the rules of war. New contact. Inside our flagship. Every head snapped up. For a fraction of a second. Something appeared on the bridge. A silhouette. Defined. Looking directly at him. Not through a screen. Not through a transmission. Directly. As if the space between them did not exist. Zethel didn't move. Couldn't. Because the realization hit all at once. This was not an enemy. Not in the way he understood. This was something else. Something that didn't fight battles. It ended them. The figure shifted. Reality around it bent. And in that instant, Zethel understood exactly one thing. They had never been the dominant force. They had never been the apex. They had simply never met anything stronger. The distortion expanded. The bridge flickered. And then, everything began to disappear. There was no battle. That was the first realization that spread through the remnants of the Dominion fleet. Battles had rules, cause and effect, action and reaction. Had none. Retreat. All vessels, retreat. Commander Kexton's voice tore across the comm channels, stripped of all composure. For the first time in Dominion history, the order was not to conquer, but to escape. Ships broke formation. Massive war vessels that had held perfect alignment moments ago now scattered in every direction, engines burning at maximum output. It didn't matter. They weren't being chased. They weren't being targeted. They were being erased. One by one. Without pattern, without priority, without resistance. A battleship at the edge of the formation vanished completely. No flicker, no warning. Gone between frames of sensor data. A carrier attempted to jump to faster-than-light velocity. Its drive core disappeared mid-charge. The ship tore itself apart under its own physics. Jump systems failing. Another voice screamed. Something is interfering with. Silence. Cut off. Not destroyed. Removed. On the tactical display, red markers blinked out faster than the system could process. 300 ships had filled the screen. Gaps spread like fractures. Admiral, we can't track them. Sexel's voice broke. The human vessels, there are still only 12, but they're everywhere. He wasn't wrong. They weren't multiplying. But they were no longer bound by position. One moment near the moon, the next, deep inside the formation. Then beyond it. Distance meant nothing. Time meant nothing. Outside both. They're inside our ships, a captain screamed over the network. They're phasing into. His signal ended. Not with static. With absence. Zethel stood at the center of the bridge. Or what remained of it. Sections of the command deck had already vanished. Consoles missing, crew gone, clean edges where reality had simply stopped. Still, no debris, no damage, just subtraction. His fleet was not being destroyed. It was being reduced. Report, he demanded, though he already knew no answer would help. Command structure collapsing. Dexter shouted. We've lost over 40% of bridge personnel across the fleet. Shields. Useless. Weapons. No effect. Every system. Every advantage. Irrelevant. This was not a failure of strength. It was a failure of comprehension. Zethel looked at the display. At what remained of his fleet. At the impossible shapes moving through it like ghosts. And for the first time, he understood. They had not been outmatched. They had been outclassed. Completely. Open all channels, he said quietly. Dexter hesitated. Admiral? Do it. The command went out. Broadcast across every frequency. Not a threat. Not a demand. A statement. This is Admiral Zethel of the Kether Dominion. His voice did not shake. Even now. We withdraw. The pause. If you can hear this. Another ship vanished behind him. We acknowledge your superiority. Silence. No reply. The human ships continued their work. Unchanged. Uninterested. As if the message did not matter. Because it didn't. This had never been a negotiation. Admiral, Sexel whispered. Zethel followed his gaze. The last cluster of warships, what remained of the Central Command formation, was disappearing faster now. Not targeted. Not attacked. Just reaching zero. How many left? Zethel asked. Dexter checked. His voice came out hollow. Less than 30. From 300 to 30. In minutes. No battle. No resistance. Just inevitability. Zethel closed his eyes for a moment. Not in fear. In clarity. For 300 years, the Dominion had believed itself unstoppable. The apex force of the galaxy. Every conquest had reinforced that belief. Every victory had made it stronger. Until it became absolute. A truth that no one questioned. A truth that no one challenged. Until now. He opened his eyes. "Transmit final log," he said. Dexter nodded silently. Recording began. Zethel spoke. "This engagement was not a battle. Another ship vanished. We encountered a capability beyond current Dominion understanding. Another, our weapons were ineffective. Another, our defenses were irrelevant. Another, we could not engage. Another, we could not retreat. Another, we could not survive." The display flickered. Only a handful of ships remained. We were not defeated. The pause. The final realization. We were removed. Behind him, the bridge shifted. Reality folding inward. Edges dissolving. Zethel stood still. There was nothing left to command. Nothing left to save. Nothing left to fight. For the first time in his life, he was no longer part of a war. He was part of an outcome. End transmission. Dexter complied. The signal went out. Across the stars. A record of something that should not have been possible. Zethel looked forward. At the space where his fleet had been. Empty now. Except for 12 ships. Unmarked. Untouched. Untouchable. He almost laughed. Not from humor. From understanding. "This is what it feels like," he said softly. "To be the primitive species." The distortion reached him. Not fast. Not violent. Just certain. And in that final moment, Admiral Zethel, conqueror of worlds, understood the last truth of war. There is always something stronger. And sometimes, it doesn't fight you. It simply decides. You were never there. The flagship vanished. Then the last cruiser. Then the final signal. And just like that, the 7th Conquest fleet ceased to exist. No wreckage. No survivors. No evidence. Only silence. And 12 ships. Already gone. The galaxy noticed the silence. At first, it was subtle. A missed report. A delayed signal. A fleet that should have returned, but didn't. The Kether Dominion did not lose fleets. That was not just belief. It was fact. Which was why the absence of the 7th Conquest fleet went unexplained. For weeks, High Command waited. For a transmission. A status update. Any indication of progress. None came. Still nothing. Supreme Commander Vorak's voice echoed through the war chamber, low and controlled. "Nothing, sir," Colonel Thexvar replied. "All communication attempts have failed." Vorak stood before the central display. Unchanged. Peaceful. Irrelevant. That's what it should have been. "They arrived," Vorak said. "We have confirmation." "Yes, sir. Long-range tracking verifies orbital insertion." "And after that?" Thexvar hesitated. "Nothing. Not interference. Not destruction. Nothing. The signal simply ended." Vorak narrowed his eyes. "Prepare reconnaissance." The order was immediate. Precise. Controlled. If the Dominion did not understand something, it investigated. 3 weeks later, the answer returned. Or rather, the lack of one. The reconnaissance squadron entered the Sol system under full sensor sweep. Long-range scans. Close-range verification. Multispectrum analysis. They found Earth. Primitive. Exactly as expected. They found the Moon. Lifeless. No installations. No structures. No detectable activity. They found orbital space. Empty. No wreckage. No debris. No residual energy signatures. No sign that 300 warships had ever been there. "Repeat the scan," Vorak ordered. "It has been repeated," Captain Morex replied. 17 times. And? Same result. Vorak turned slowly. "That is not possible." "No, sir. But it is correct." Silence settled across the chamber. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because for the first time, the Dominion did not have an explanation. "Assessment," Vorak said. Morex chose his words carefully. "The 7th Conquest fleet reached Earth." The pause. And then it ceased to exist. No battle. No evidence. No trace. Just absence. General Korin leaned forward. What of the humans? Morex hesitated. Unchanged. That word echoed. Because it shouldn't have been. They show no signs of technological advancement, Morex continued. No new infrastructure. No increase in military capability. Impossible, Korin said. They are still using chemical propulsion, Morex added. Their weapons remain primitive. Vorak stared at the display. At the quiet blue world. At the species that should not matter. Then what happened to our fleet? No one answered. Because there was no answer. Not one the Dominion could accept. Unknown stellar phenomenon, Korin said finally. A rare anomaly. A natural event. Vorak didn't respond. Because that explanation did not satisfy him. But it was the only one available. For now, he said, the official report was filed. The 7th Conquest Fleet. But, unknown. Reclassified. Low priority. Observation only. The Dominion moved on. Because that is what empires do. They do not dwell on mysteries. They do not question their superiority. They continue. But the silence remained. Not loud. Not obvious. But present. A gap in their history. A question without an answer. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of Luna, humanity watched. Recon fleet has departed the system, Torres reported. Saracen stood in the same command center. Unmoved. Any indication they detected us? She asked. None. Good. The illusion held. That was what mattered. Because knowledge changed behavior. And behavior changed outcomes. As long as the Dominion believed Earth was primitive, they would underestimate it. And that was the advantage. Status of Phantom Squadron? Sarah asked. Fully phased, Morrison replied. No exposure. No trace. Webb reviewed the final logs. All dimensional signatures scrubbed. There is no physical evidence of engagement. Perfect, Sarah said. That was the design. Not just victory. Erasure. A battle that never happened. An enemy that never arrived. A threat that never existed. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth remained irrelevant. And that was exactly how humanity wanted it. For now, Torres said quietly. Sarah nodded. Yes. Because this was only the beginning. The Dominion had lost one fleet. They would send another. Stronger. More cautious. More prepared. And next time, they would not underestimate. Which meant, next time would be different. Sarah turned toward the display. Toward the stars beyond. We won this engagement, she said. The pause. But we revealed nothing. Webb looked at her. And when we do? Sarah's expression didn't change. Then we won't be defending. Silence. Not uncertain. Inevitable. Because humanity had already crossed the threshold. They had stepped beyond survival. Beyond reaction. Into something else entirely. Control. Prepare long-range transmission, Sarah said. Torres looked up. To the Dominion? No. She shook her head. To everyone. The room stilled. Because that meant one thing. Revelation. Message content? Torres asked. Sarah considered for a moment. Then spoke. Simple. The pause. Clear. Another. Unmistakable. The transmission array powered up. Deep space frequencies. Channels known to be monitored by every advanced civilization within range. Humanity's first true message to the galaxy. Not a greeting. Not a warning. A statement. Torres waited. Ready, Admiral. Saracen looked out at the stars. At the silent, endless dark. At the countless civilizations watching, listening, waiting. Then she spoke. This is Earth. The pause. No fear. No hesitation. We are not what you think we are. Another pause. Cold. Controlled. And if you come for us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You will not leave. The signal broadcast. Across light years. Across empires. Across the unknown. And for the first time, the galaxy understood something it had never considered before. Earth was not a weak world. Not a primitive species. Not a future conquest. It was something else entirely. Something quiet. Something patient. Something that did not seek war, but ended it. And somewhere, far beyond human space, when the next fleet was prepared, when the next conquest was planned, when the next commander looked toward that small blue world, they would remember one thing. Not the battle. Not the technology. Not the loss. Because there was no evidence of any of it. They would remember the silence. And they would ask a question no Dominion had ever needed to ask before. We are not the strongest? And that question would change everything.